What love and goodness all my life will follow after me, and in the Lord's house evermore.
This is the Westminster Standard Podcast. I'm Ryan Beasy. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Daryl Hart and soon-to-be Dr. George Sayour. Welcome to the program, both of you.
Thank you.
Good to be with you, Ryan.
It's glad to have you back. I want to talk a little bit about Christian nationalism. George, you've kind of cornered the market on that, so I appreciate you giving us some broadcast rights and a limited license to discuss this topic.
Yes, you're allowed to talk to Daryl. Yes, you are. And I was told I was an influencer today, so that's yeah. Look at that.
Wow.
By Daryl.
Okay. All right. But Daryl, can you give us your background and your work? You're a professor at Hillsdale. You are an elder in the Orthodox Presbyterian Church. You serve on their Christian Nationalism committee. You've taught at numerous seminaries around the country. So give us your background, thumbnail sketch.
I'm a historian currently at Hillsdale. I've been here for 15 years, roughly. Prior to that, I had taught at Westminster Philly, Westminster California, administration and teaching. And I've been writing about Presbyterianism and other topics since my first book on J-Gresham. And I'm currently inactive as an elder, but once an elder, always an elder, I think, according to Presbyterian polity. And I am, for that reason, currently serving on the Christian Nationalism Study Committee of the OPC. We've had one organizational meeting so far. That's been it.
Were you elected chairman?
I was not. Thankfully.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
I am the secretary. I've been clerk of session, and I know how to take notes.
Well, condolences on being secretary. That's all of the work and none of the pay.
Well, but if you think back to the original Continental Congress, Charles Thompson was the secretary. And because he had to sign off on all sorts of communication, some people kind of compared him to a kind of prime minister role. Maybe I can control things more so in that capacity than as chairman. I'm kidding. In case you're listening, Dave Van Druden, who is our chairman.
Well, yeah, I've always thought being clerk or secretary is good because you can make sure that the motions and the language is clear, or that it accurately reflects what happened. So congratulations on being secretary. George, you are minister to state in Florida for the PCA. And any updates in your life since last we spoke?
What was that, yesterday? Things are going great in Florida. And I've been pastor in two churches, ordained over 10 years, but I was a ruling elder before that. And so I've been an elder, been a deacon, elder, and pastor. And now, as you said, I'm serving as like a chaplain in Florida state government through ministry to state. And as you've already indicated, I've done a number of conversations around this topic on my podcast, Grace at the Gates. So that's me.
Excellent. Well, we want to talk about Christian nationalism, and but one of the other sort of bubbling topics in the Reformed world is confessional subscription, and I think those two things go together. But Daryl, can you just give us an overview of how subscription works in the Orthodox Presbyterian Church? In the PCA, we have full subscription in good faith. You can state differences and possibly get an exception. But as I understand it, that's not the way it works in the OPC. How does it work in the OPC as far as subscription?
I mean, it's very much local. It depends on, the presbytery. And I've only been not a member of presbytery, but I've attended presbytery two places, Philadelphia and Michigan and Ontario, current presbytery of which our congregation is part. And I haven't been at a lot of meetings, but my observation was a candidate comes forward, is examined by the committee, candidates and credentials, and then opened up to the floor. And then there is a vote on whether or not the man has is acceptable. So there's not really I mean, people do ask questions about catechisms and confession and how they may render certain language in there, but it's very much up to the presbyters that are assembled whether they pass the guy on or not.
Hmm.
But we
So
don't have a
if a
formal
man had
mechanism for declaring differences
differences,
or taking
okay,
exception.
yeah, that's because the PCA was struggling with how do we deal with this because. Well, and Presbyterians, as you know, have struggled with what does it mean to subscribe the confession? How much room for latitude is there where you can still
Right.
subscribe?
I mean, that's one of the things I was surprised about in the report is how much, and it makes sense because of the revisions to the Westminster Confession and catechisms. But so the language of subscription is important, but I mean, I also think just personally, the PCA in adopting good faith subscription, in my view, kind of watered down what subscription meant. And I wonder how much that's going to be a factor in the way the communion judges subscription in this case. And I just don't, you guys have a better sense of that than I do.
What's your sense, George?
Yeah, good faith subscription was meant to be a mechanism to allow guys to be honest about having a difference, but and we've seen this in presbyteries, Ryan, that now it's viewed as, well, yeah, you're allowed to have differences, just say them. And so, you see 5-6 different guys having 5-6 differences with the confession. So it definitely has eroded what we believe is a denomination, because it's very hard to separate belief from teaching. And so the next, it's the camel with the nose in the tent. So we've seen that at a few GAs ago where guys are saying, well, if it's not striking at the vitals and you've approved that I can have this difference, why can't I teach it? So I must be able to teach this. My conscience demands it. And so now the denomination is held hostage to what exceptions the presbyteries are granting. And, I saw an article you've recently published. I'm not sure who wrote it, and it's a conversation we've had many times, but exceptions don't become beliefs of the PCA. They don't become acceptable beliefs of the PCA. They simply mean we allow you to hold your erroneous belief. And I know that really rustles people's feathers. And they said, well, you're saying the confession is inerrant. I said, no, I'm not saying the confession's inerrant, but to the best of our ability, this is what the denomination believes. And we're allowing you to believe something different, but you can't teach that. So.
Yeah. And a lot of it comes down to the different presbytery. It can be a way to water down subscription, or, what I've seen in the presbytery of which I'm currently a member, it actually increases, I think, our adherence to the standards, because we say, well, you have to state every single difference that you have. And, I was at an exam committee meeting, and one of the guys was saying, well, we have this, this summary of what we believe as a presbytery. I think I'm in accord with that. Oh, no. What do you believe? And we'll tell you whether you're in accord with it or not. And but that's the presbytery being proactive. So it sounds like in the OPC they will just ask, how do you understand this catechism question or this paragraph in the Confession of Faith?
Right. And it's, seemingly more organic than having any kind of structure for expressing differences. But Well, by the way, if when you talk about your presbytery, Ryan, is there a list somewhere that people have in the presbytery of each member and differences that they've stated, or is
It
it?
would not it would not be, well, maybe, our clerk is amazing. Thomas Rickard is our clerk, so he actually may have a file of everyone's
Okay.
stated differences, but it would be in the minutes of, because that's one of the things that is required. If you have any difference at all with
Huh,
the standards, you
okay.
have to state that at the start, and then affirm in good faith that the rest of the standards you can subscribe to, and then Presbytery will decide how do your differences relate to the rest of the confession and the catechisms.
Yeah.
And
I mean, as a
and you're
historian,
right.
that'd be great material to, 50 years go back and
Yes,
see how that.
yes. And ruling elder Matt Lee, formerly of the Orthodox Presbyterian Church, has done really interesting work as those differences have been reviewed by General Assembly, and seeing how differences are changing, and the trajectory. But that's a topic for another podcast, isn't it, George?
Yeah, I mean that's a rabbit. I have so much I want to say, but that's not why we're here. So.
When-
And I do want to say I want for the record I am for allowing quibbles with wording in. I mean we have to be able to have a conversation to say I wish this was worded differently, or I mean one very famous beloved founder takes difference with the language around testament versus covenant, and so these are quibbles with the standards, and I think that's fine. But like what we're seeing is an outright rejection of what our confession teaches on certain things, and those I don't think are fun.
right, yeah, yeah.
And to that
But let's
point,
let's
the OPC,
oh, yeah.
OPC may be messing things up by coming out with a modern language version of the standards, but that's again down the road from this. And it could
We'll
play
see if
out
they
better
can
in the
do it.
OPC where we don't have the mechanisms as much as opposed to the PCA where maybe there's more strictness about stating differences.
Yeah, and that the language I'm teaching through J. Gresham Machen's Christianity and Liberalism. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it was this book that was written 103 years, or published 103 years ago. But one of the points that we talked about in Sunday school is how language changes. And one of the tactics of the liberals is to change the meaning of language. But when we subscribe to the Westminster Confession and Catechisms, we're subscribing to the language as it was intended in the 17th century, not as those words necessarily have evolved and what they might mean today as additional definitions. So I'll be curious to see how that, and I know that people will still subscribe to the original, but how that modernized language works out. I think Doug Kelly tried to come out with a modernized, shorter catechism. Kevin Bidwell's come up with an updated version, but it's hard to get traction. But on the subject of updates, there's been a little bit of discussion of Christian nationalism over the last 6 years. And Professor Hart, you have been somewhat active in those discussions as a church historian, as a professor of history, as an elder in the church. It's something that is of great interest to you. And I wonder, as you've been in those discussions, has your position changed at all? Have you refined how you would articulate things from 2019 versus 2026? Or
Actually, I don't think I have. I mean, I see expressions of Christian politics
yeah,
without maybe calling it Christian nationalism yet, as being different from, say, 2019 or 2011 or 1995. I mean, my own outlook is I draw very much, and of course, I'm maybe copping out by pleading Machen. A lot of people haven't read Machen, and I commend you, Ryan, for teaching Christian liberalism. But I really did learn to think differently about American politics, government, the place of Christianity in the mix from reading and studying Machen, who was the topic of my dissertation. I had never seen anybody think like that. And I think Machen reflects a longer tradition of Presbyterian thought about government and the authority of the church, the authority of the state, and Presbyterians going back both in America and Scotland, etc., thought about those different spheres in a variety of ways. And having grown up a Baptist fundamentalist, um, I just those categories weren't around, so that Machen was my introduction to them. And of course, Machen is also using those categories, um, especially from the Southern Church, but the Northern Church as well. It not necessarily as an outworking of his own politics, but his own politics was he was a Democrat, he was a libertarian, um, and again, those were positions that I had not really encountered before growing up in the North, middle class, suburban home, fundamentalist church, and whatnot.
Mm.
So that is still very much my. It's not as if I go back to Machen and find out what the answer is to a particular problem, but particularly the spirituality of the church and what the church is called to do. I've just been writing an article for our publication, the OPC's publication, Ordained Servant, and I wound up writing about Machen's opposition to prohibition and the vote that he took in the spring of 1926 at his presbytery, the Presbytery of New Brunswick, which he then later explained why he voted that way and opposed prohibition. But that vote was used against him to deny him a promotion at Princeton Seminary. And as I sort of written the article, it actually was kind of the undoing of Machen at Princeton and led to the reorganization of Princeton and founding of Westminster, et cetera. So it was a very controversial and consequential vote. But again, Machen's reasons for that are kind of the way I still think about the spiritual nature of the church, how the state operates, which is basically as a coercive power to make law and enforce it. And those are distinct operations. And I think Machen really did try to keep them separate. And he was also very much worried about what the state could do with its coercive power, and therefore limiting it as much as possible was desirable, not merely for the sake of the church, although that was also a primary concern, but also for the sake of other liberties that Americans enjoy.
And in that period, the late teens and the late aughts, or we're supposed to call them. No, those are the teens, and then the 20s with the benevolent empire and historic mainline Protestant churches trying to run the country, which was a form of Christian nationalism. Do you see the parallels today with what is sometimes called Christian nationalism with the benevolent empire? You know, we've talked about elsewhere, you know, the woke right and the woke left, that they're really the same.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, they're left-wing Christian nationalists and right-wing Christian nationalists. Do you see overlap, and does that concern you if you see it?
Well, I am concerned about Christian nationalism today. I don't.
You're on a committee to rid the USA of Christian nationalism.
Exactly.
I see.
Exactly. That's not the OPC committee, by the way. And that is a joke for anybody watching. That's a joke.
It's not. I'm kidding. That's a joke.
I know. What is different? I've heard Christian nationalists today offer no objection to the spirituality of the church. And I've heard people that George has had on his podcast say that. Oh, we believe the spirituality of the church. We don't want the church getting involved in politics. So that's an important difference. The Presbyterian Church USA, the 1920s, there was an overlap. It wasn't as if it was some kind of theocracy or theocratic element, but people in the church then had politicians who were members of the PCUSA. There was no worry about sort of keeping the two necessarily distinct. And the church would support the government would support the church, all indirect usually and unofficial, but still it was a kind of integralism that the Roman Catholic integralists, a kind of cooperation between church and state that is not possible today because there are no Christian nationalists who have political office. They may aspire to it. I know Stephen Wolfe has lately been talking about getting involved in politics, but so that's not the case. Christian nationalists, the PCA and the OPC are sideline denominations. Yes, you're 10 times bigger and more than the OPC. And yes, you're an influencer denomination. But still, the PCA doesn't really have muscle. Although, I mean, George, with ministry to state, could maybe change that. Actually, this isn't the subject of the podcast, but I'd like to hear more about that at some point. Just for curiosity's sake, not to wag my finger and disapprove.
I think we can weave that in.
So I see big differences, but the biggest difference, I guess, I see between the current versions, expressions of Christian nationalism and progressive politics in the 1920s, which was a kind of Christian nationalism, is I've not heard conservative Protestants in my lifetime talk about suppression of false religion or false belief or of blasphemy or heresy. But that word suppression, I have not heard as much. Well, I've not heard. And now I hear it a lot more. And I don't like that word. I am a libertarian. I think giving government power to suppress is a very dangerous thing, even if it's for good reason, which is something I learned from J. Gresham Machen. Using the 18th Amendment and the Volstead Act to eliminate drunkenness from the United States. Sorry. He would have said that's a good thing to eliminate drunkenness. And he made clear he was opposed to drunkenness. But how you prosecute that using the levers of government and law was an entirely different matter. And, histories of prohibition or that era will tell us that prohibition was markedly unsuccessful in eliminating consumption of alcohol, and it created all sorts of criminal business endeavors that made alcohol consumption widely available. My wife and I'm teaching just parenthetically, I'll try to get to the point, but I'm teaching a course on the Great Gatsby, the great novel by F. Scott Fitzgerald, teaching that in the fall, and reading it and then watching the 2013 version of the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio. And it's just, there's booze everywhere. There's just booze everywhere. And this is set in the 1920s in the midst of Prohibition. And no one is kind of scratching their head, except for people who are wondering where Gatsby got his money. And there's chances are that he was tied in with bootleggers, etc. Anyway, so suppression of immorality or false belief is something that I think you have to be very wary of. I think that's what the American system of government has been historically wary of, libertarians emphasizing that perhaps more than others, even though you want to prosecute something that would be good, whether it's Christianity or opposing immorality or something, it really could and usually does boomerang on you. And that's what I find surprising is that people talking about suppression, talking about government having more power, and not sort of having a think about, wait a minute, what would that mean? How could that possibly go wrong if people have power and then you have a change in administration, etc.?
I remember back in 2020 when they were printing money and giving it away as the payroll protection program, and churches were eligible to apply, and I think many PCA churches did. And I believe it was our current moderator, Mel Duncan, who posted on social media, remember, there will be an election in, whatever it was, 200 days, and a new president and possibly a new president. before you as churches start accepting this money. And he didn't take a position; he just said, "Remember,
Right.
when the government gives you money, it never gives it for free." And I think that's a fair point that people need to remember. When you give the government a power, you can't control how it will use that power. And we do see the government suppressing false religion, um, as it has determined what is a false religion. In this country, if you prayed outside of an abortion clinic and had a hymn sing, the FBI would come raid your house under the previous administration. In the United Kingdom, if you pray silently in your head alone within so many yards of an abortion clinic, they will take you to jail. So the government will suppress false religion, however it defines that, if it has the
Right.
authority to,
Yep.
or the power.
Yes.
I know authority can
Right.
be kind of a tricky word with Romans 13, right?
Right.
Uh, so in your a Wall Street Journal article, you trying to see if I can make this bigger.
That
Uh,
looks a little rumpled.
yeah. Well,
You had to
those
pull
of
it out
us.
of the trash or something. No.
I think this is the version that James Baird's mother is framing for him.
Yes.
But how are you defining Christian nationalism in this article? When the PCA, for example, did a report on Federal Vision, it did the new perspectives on Paul and the Federal Vision, because there are multiple new perspectives. It seems like there are a lot of Christian nationalisms.
Right.
How do you define Christian nationalism versus the civic religion that you also speak of, right of?
Well, I did go back in preparation for this podcast and looked again at the report, which I've read, the PCA report, which I read, and I did a word search, Control F, and I see that the PCA report does not define Christian nationalism, um, and that it acknowledges that there are many different meanings of it, but my definition, based on what I was just saying about suppression, is what I hear consistently from both Stephen Wolfe and James Baird, and they're not by no means the same. I'm not trying to lump them together or somehow implicate either one in the other's views, but both of them write frequently about Christian government. Wolfe talks about a Christian prince. And that chapter may be one of the most stunning chapters in there, because it's precisely what the consistent Presbyterians in Scotland, whether the Associate Church, the Seceders, or the Free Church, detested about the Scottish government, and reasons why they left the Church of Scotland, which was to have the lords or the lairds involved in the appointment and selection and approval of the parish minister. And Wolfe is almost explicitly saying, no, we want the prince in a almost Constantine-like way to be involved in managing the church. And then in James Baird's case, he uses, I think, the language of suppression more than Wolfe, but he also argues for a Christian government, and even talks, at least online, social media, about perhaps having religious qualifications for holding office. And it's so what I would say Christian nationalism, as I see it in these two relatively popular expressions, is the idea that we need a Christian government. And as I argue in the column, I take that to be illiberal, because American politics has meant that I know there were states who were varied at different times about religious qualifications for holding office, but generally speaking, the way the United States played out was religious liberty, so that any person with holding any opinion or belief could hold office and officiate, depending on the branch of government they're in, officiate American government. So no religious tests for holding office. But Baird and Wolf seemed to favor some sort of religious test for holding office. And I think that's just a very different view. I've not heard that before, and I'm old enough to remember Francis Schaeffer and Jerry Falwell. I was at L'Abri in the one in Switzerland, the real one, in 1976 on the eve of the election between Jimmy Carter and Gerald Ford. And that's about the time that Schaefer was beginning to show up on cable television with the 700 Club with Pat Robertson. And Schaefer, obviously, toward the end of his career, the last 10 years or so, very much involved with recovering a Christian America, recovering the Christian roots of America. But I do not recall him arguing for a Christian government, a Christian magistrate, or any kind of religious test for office the way that the current Christian nationalists are, both sometimes explicitly and other times implicitly.
And it seems like with Baird, at least, it's more softer as you get higher, right? The federal very very loose, very light, and with local and state more involved in terms of which is of course how the country was functioning back in the 18th and early 19th century, with these states having religious tests, but it's enshrined in the federal constitution that there is no religious test for office. Um, Although I think I've seen Senate hearings where there seems to be a religious test for office, that if you're a Christian, Bernie Sanders will get all red in the face and oppose your nomination.
Right. But even the religious tests, and I've gone back and read some of the constitutions, were generic, generically Trinitarian or generically Christian. And, if you want to go back to the original Westminster Confession of 1646, the American tests for office were really squishy and liberal because they allowed Roman Catholics to hold office. Now, it would take time before there were enough Roman Catholics in the population to vote Roman Catholics into office, which happened very much at the local level initially, especially places where Roman Catholic immigrants were settling. But you would not have had a Roman Catholic holding office in Britain up until the 19th century. And in fact, the whole question of the succession of the monarchy, which led to the Glorious Revolution of 1688 and 89, was precisely over the fact that James II was a Roman Catholic and was rearing his son as a Roman Catholic. And Parliament said, we are not going to do that. Could we get William III, please? Please, could we get,
let's get the Dutch
can
guy.
we get another monarch here? Thank you.
Yeah. Now, when was Roman Catholic emancipation in the United Kingdom?
1828 or 9, somewhere about there.
And so about the time that some of these religious tests for office were falling away in this country, but even though we might disagree on a religious test for office, and I wonder what your view is of because how do we balance these things with the magistrate in our 1788 Constitution is not to interfere in the least in matters of faith, but at the same time he is also to promote piety, justice, and peace, and both of those there's a lot of discretion there. What does it mean to interfere in the least in matters of faith? But also he's to promote piety, justice, and peace. How do you see that working out in a society?
Right. And I'm not saying this to cop out, but I would like to hear from George anytime so that he's not simply a fly on the wall. Or maybe, Ryan, you invited him on the show just to be a monitor then that's
Well,
fine.
it's because he's trademarked all discussion of podcasting regarding Christian nationalism.
No,
He
I
has to
invite.
be on the show. Otherwise,
Okay.
it's illegal.
All right.
Well, like you
But-
said, like you said online, the poor. Jesus says, "The poor you will always have with you, and you'll always have me with you, Daryl, because I
But-
am poor."
But back to your question, Ryan. I do want to hear from George, but I don't. I,
And
don't
I
wanna
think this
just-
might be a
I
way for him
actually
to
have
talk
an
about his
answer. I
ministry.
have an answer for that, by the way. But okay.
But let's be clear, Ryan. You said promote piety, justice, and peace. It doesn't say promote. It says maintain.
Yes,
And
yes.
there's a
that's true.
difference
That's true.
between promoting and maintaining. And
Okay.
maintaining suggests working with the population that you have, especially when
Okay.
it goes on to say, according to the wholesome laws of each commonwealth. And therefore you have to look around at your situation and okay, if you're in Philadelphia in 1788, there's a Jewish synagogue and a Jewish population, very small, but there are 2 Roman Catholic parishes and a convent there. George Washington himself, during the Constitutional Convention, the first Sunday he was there, went to one of those Roman Catholic parishes. Please don't tell Dr. Lobet. Please don't tell Dr. Lobet. And so you got to work. It seems to me what the confession is calling for here is working with what you have. Now, if you're in Tennessee or if you're in Florida and you have a very different kind of demographic there, it seems to me that confession is allowing room for that. But I still think there's a difference between maintaining and promoting. And piety
Even-
is only
oh, sorry.
one word. Justice and peace are also pretty big words. And just one more thought, and then I'll let you go, George. During June, there was a lot of promotion of piety by the government, and it had to do with a certain rainbow colored flag. And if that's what government's going to do with promoting piety, and it is in some ways maintaining the piety of a certain section of the population, no thank you. Let's just not have any promotion of piety, period.
George, you want to give your view before I?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think everything. I don't really have a problem with anything Daryl has said so far. I mean, maybe certain quibbles, and I am not. Not only do I not identify as a Christian nationalist, I don't even think of myself as a Christian nationalist. I just want people's positions reflected honestly and fairly. And maybe Daryl has said I am Christian nationalist adjacent or attracted. And I think for me, like a lot of these things are actually political questions that the church is trying to weigh into. And so who says the government can't suppress heresies? Now, I don't want them to. I want to be clear about that. I don't want the government to suppress heresies in the United States of America. But when we subscribe to the Westminster Standards, we are saying this is what we believe the Bible teaches on this thing. It's a systematic theology in a sense. And a theology is not dependent on space and time and place. It is the theological position of a thing. And so we can argue we don't want we don't want Donald Trump calling synods. I don't. Okay. But I can't say the Bible says that the king of some place can't call the church to meet on a thing. And that is my issue with the PCA's report. That's my issue with a lot of these conversations. People are acting like America's, and I love this country, and I can't think of a better system. But our political system does not determine our political theology. So around interfering in the least in matters of faith. So the report takes the position, and I know people have gave this feedback to the committee, and it'll be interesting to see if the committee does anything about this. But the calling of synods in a Christian nationalist, or just simply, like, I wonder what Miles Smith would even say about this. The calling of synods is not interfering in matters of faith. There may be a prudential reason that a magistrate for order and piety in a commonwealth would call the church to a synod. Now, interfering in matters of faith would be what the original confession said, which is to preside over it and determine if everything they conducted was true or something like that. And of course, I'm paraphrasing. But the new confession, the report has taken the stance that this does not allow the magistrate to call synods, suppress heresies. Now, well, in what way is the magistrate not allowed to suppress heresies? In the churches? No, I agree. The magistrate can't suppress heresies in the churches. Inasmuch as heresies, well, again, didn't Constantine call Nicaea over a heresy? And so my point in saying this is, again, back to sort of the beginning point, is we need to be careful not to make America's political arrangement definitive of a political theology. It is an application, and I happen to actually like it and think it has provided for the most flourishing society civilization has ever had. But I'm not willing to say that America's Constitution is the biblical thing. And I'm afraid that that's the conversation that we're happening. So we do believe, as Dr. Hart said, we in the PCA, wherever you are in the spectrum, in the spirituality of the church. But when Calvin talks of two kingdoms, he speaks of the twofold kingdom under the lordship of Christ, which simply just says that the state and the church have different jurisdictions. In other words, they have a different way of handling, in some sense, the same truth. And so the state is worried about ordering society, and we can't pretend in these debates that people's beliefs don't affect how society is ordered. They're going to be ordered on something. It's going to be ordered on something. So there will be overlap. And the example that I always use, and the last thing I'll say, is the state already speaks into matters of religion. You can't be a polygamist, even if Mormon theology teaches it. You're not allowed to do circumcision on women, even if Islamic religion tells you that's a part of their thing. So the state does already speak into these things. And while I want that at a minimum, I'm not willing to say the state can't have a voice in them.
Oh, were you done there, George? Oh, okay.
But what happens, George, if, and this is in the order of the libertarian, what could go wrong? The magistrate calls a synod and the church refuses. No, we're not going to do it. And then can the magistrate retaliate? I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to escalate to that level, but I'd rather not be put in a situation where, for instance, if I have to, give a prayer at some sort of interdenominational or interreligious meeting, and you're in a difficult situation. How do you say no to that? But when the person asking you to do this has all the guns and could make life difficult for your communion, maybe it wouldn't be that great a thing. And I mean, I'm with you in the sense, and I think this is a potential problem of the report. If the report comes along and says the American Constitution and the revision of the Confession, which is happening at roughly the same time, are kind of the biblical norm, but at the same time, where do you find in the Bible, in the New Testament especially, after Jesus, any mention that the apostles were thinking, no, we really want Nero, or we really want the emperor, or we really want the Roman governor to call a synod? I mean,
I agree with you. And that's why I'm saying this is a political and not a theological conversation, but pastors have decided and denominations have decided that we're going to create a theological answer to a political problem. And I just think it is a political, like this, the report makes all kinds of statements that are political as if they're theological. One was that biological descent does not confer political legitimacy. Who says that? You're going to
The
tell
Republicans in England would say that, and Scotland, the anti-monarchist party, would say that.
Of course, and that's my point. I mean, so I understand the desire to protect our multicultural history, heritage, and existence right now, and so and to speak against racist attitudes or negative attitudes against other people groups. But the report is making statements claiming they're theological, that every society ever, except 100 years ago and outside of America, every other society would say, "What are you talking about?" So, and that's my issue. If this report, and I gave this feedback to the committee. I said, look, if you say we believe that our report reflects an accurate application of the Westminster Standards for the U.S. 21st century political context, I would say, okay, all right, I get that. But that's not what it says. It says it's making a claim on reading back American 21st century political existence back into chapter 23 of the Westminster Standards. And I just don't agree with that, even if I agree with a lot of the conclusions that they want to draw from it.
But I want to come back to something that you said, Daryl. You're right. It is maintain piety, justice, and peace. But I wonder, in the intention of the 1788 Assembly, would they have viewed Roman Catholics and Jews as having piety or impiety? And they call, elsewhere, it's papists and other idolaters. Would they have viewed Roman Catholic worship as piety? Were they using piety in the sense of
I really don't know, and I'd really like to know what kind of interaction the Presbyterian ministers in Philadelphia may have had with the Roman Catholic priests there. And I mean, the guy, I should do this at some point. I don't have the time. I'm not close to the archives, but George Duffield at Old Pine Church, Third Presbyterian. I think that's what it is. Maybe second. I'm not sure which number it is, but it's now called Old Pine. Historic congregation, now incredibly liberal. But he was a prominent supporter of the Revolution. I think he served as a chaplain in some of the one division of the Continental Army, I think. I may be getting that wrong. But he's there living within a couple blocks, and his church is a couple blocks from some of those Roman Catholic parishes. It's hard for me to imagine they didn't have some kind of interaction. But I don't know. And we have to remember as well that one of the reasons why Presbyterians wind up making Philadelphia, in effect, the capital of Presbyterians in the United States, is because the Quakers ran a very tolerant society. Yes, they had some religious qualifications. If you go back and read William Penn's plan, there were requirements about believing in the Trinity and affirming Scripture, which eventually were changed. But I mean, that kind of toleration is at the heart of the first Presbytery meeting in 1706, the first synod, 1777, and then eventually the General Assembly, all taking place in Philadelphia. And it was probably the most religiously diverse place in the United States. And Presbyterians had no problem meeting there and holding their assemblies there. Doesn't mean they approved necessarily of that religious toleration, but it also means that religious toleration allowed Presbyterians to set up shop in the United States and to create this denomination. This denomination, PCUSA, none of us are in that, even though, of course, it's sort of the mother church for both the OPC and PCA. Not a very kind mother, but still a mother.
She's our wayward mother.
Yes.
the magistrate in most jurisdictions in the 18th and even into the 19th century, and I think the last blasphemy conviction was shortly after the Second World War. Um, but how should, or what role, in your view, does the magistrate have in punishing blasphemy, punishing immorality? Obviously, we talked about the prohibition and the egregious error that it was, but the magistrate is to punish those who do evil. And so how does he come to know what is evil? Is there any blasphemy that he should be punishing, or was it wrong for a magistrate to punish blasphemy in the 19th century in this country?
Right. I mean, I would say it wasn't immoral to do it. It was certainly legal to do it. It wouldn't be what I would advise, even though I think in the cases of blasphemy that were prosecuted, I would like to know what the process was beforehand and what the relationship between the blasphemer and the government were, because there are rivalries between public officials and citizens that can sometimes get very toxic, and government can use various measures to go after someone. I believe there's a sitting president who may have had some encounters with that kind of lawfare. And I'm not saying that those prosecutions of blasphemers was not sincere, but I would like to know the whole picture. But also, I would like to know if a mayor or a county executive or a governor thinks that there is someone who is particularly guilty of blasphemous expressions, is there a way to try to ask that person to just stop it? Look, you're offending many people who live here. We're all trying to live here together. Could you just ratchet it down a little bit? And of course, there are many people who like to be provocative. I sometimes have that instinct myself. Can you believe it?
Do you? Do you though?
But so I would say non-coercive, non-legislative ways to try to handle this would be better than using the heavy hand of law and coercion. And I do think that those are ways to go. And I don't think the confession or catechisms specify in any way how a magistrate might still try to do that.
Yeah.
And my arguments would be not to protect in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, even though I do want to protect the name of Christ, but it would be to say, look, can you just try to get along in this relatively diverse place and not offend your neighbors? And I think that's decent public policy, and it doesn't have to be implemented necessarily by law.
But if it's not law, then is it just the magistrate using his influence and his gravitas to appeal to a person to go along to get along?
Well, his or someone else's, maybe one of the major contributors to the mayor, who also knows the blasphemer and can, make a request of this person, get a deal done, and get the person to stop. Again, I'm not for blasphemy, and I'm not for the kind of provocation that blasphemy exhibits or creates. I'm still very much offended by the drag queen story hour. I think it was incredibly stupid and offensive. I don't think it's blasphemy. I just think it's a poke in the eye of many families that use those public libraries. And I think a mayor or some commission within a city could go to that librarian and say, knock it off. What are you doing? we're going to defund you if you do this. And that doesn't have anything then to do with what the drag queen does with his or her. Are they, do we know their sex? I don't know. Does with their life.
I'm always unclear when someone says transgender. I don't know what they're talking about there.
But like,
You can have a drag queen story hour at the gay bar down the street. Just get it out of the public library.
well, so but to that point, you're kind of making the point. You're saying we're going to defund you, library, for allowing this to happen, which is using the magistrate, the lower magistrate's power of the sword in that case to determine that. The question is, would you be willing to allow that, or willing to allow the magistrate to do that and say, we're going to defund you, library, for allowing this, but then also not have them defund it if they wanted to have, if some Christian group wanted to have Bible reading in the library, because for kids, because what I always seems to me is it's like, well, we don't want the drag queens doing it, so we have to prevent everybody that has some kind of religious or social view to do it. And what I hear the Christian Nationalists saying is, no, we can prohibit the drag queen from doing it while also promoting the Christian, allowing them to do their thing.
See, and I think that's in our climate, depending on the city, depending on the public library, I think having Bible reading story hour could be equally provocative. And
Right.
I'm not interested in using public space to be provocative unless it's Twitter.
Well, because that's, yeah. So,
And that's private. I mean, it's
but
privately
the point
owned.
is, so here's to understand maybe me a little bit. I respect that you have a position on that, and it's a valid position. I don't take that position to be moral law for like inherently true or right. there is a position that says, no, we are going to allow it, whether it is offensive to people, that there's going to be a Bible reading. And I know you guys with, Machen doesn't want Bible reading in schools and this, that, and the other, but there is a position that says, yeah, that's going to be fine, but the other thing isn't fine. And I think that's a political position. I don't think it's a theological one.
Right, but it still wouldn't necessarily be an official endorsement of Christianity. It would be a reflection of um, the wholesome laws and I'm adding phrases here now, but the wholesome laws in the composition of each commonwealth. What will the commonwealth bear in this situation? And if you're a public library in Northwest Iowa in 1930, and all of the people or 80% of the people are Dutch Calvinists or Dutch American Calvinists, and the public library wants to have a reading of, um, I don't know, Gerhardus Voss's whatever, as if, that's fine. I mean, that's kind of organic to that community. Um, but I wouldn't want a law saying we're going to have so many religious story hours this year, and we're going to require the librarian to implement that.
Yeah, and I think
I think
that's
whatever kind of expression can bubble up from the population that is conducive to social harmony and that is is good. And if the Bible is going to be offensive and drag queen story hour being going to be offensive, I know this doesn't seem fair because the Bible has much more standing, obviously, as the Word of God, and obviously within the history of the West. But I still think if your community is such that a Bible reading story hour is going to be offensive, I don't think you should do it.
But there's a difference between the drag queen story hour and a blasphemy law. And getting back to my prior question, that we can, I think you can even make a natural law argument against drag queen story hour because it just doesn't work. But there is no natural law argument against blasphemy, right? That requires special revelation. And if the magistrate's involvement in suppressing blasphemy or punishing blasphemy to maintain piety, if his involvement is, hey, knock that off, right? Well, that's just discretion. But if there's actually, it's a $25 fine if you say anything irreverent about a member of the Holy Trinity or his mother, the Lord's mother. That's, but I think that's more what it was up until shortly after the Second World War. And some of these blasphemy laws are still in the books, just can't be enforced.
So, Ryan, I'm not even sure I'm willing to concede your first premise that there's no natural law argument against blasphemy. I think Romans 1 is the natural law argument against blasphemy. Now, you're right. There's no natural law argument against blasphemy against God as we know him as Trinity. But there's varying, or Christ as his son, but there's varying levels to that. And yeah, I mean, not Romans 1 would be the go-to. So, but what I would say is to your original question about this, whether it's even, blasphemy laws or Sabbath laws, the assumption of anti-Christian nationalists is that Christian nationalists want to lock people up for not going to church or for public blasphemy. And to be sure, some do, but there's a much more moderated position that simply says the magistrate, in order to honor the first table of the law, may not have to do the punishments, but is ordering society to promote such things. And some of that would be the individual citizen. We're not going to, throw them in jail if they proclaim a different God publicly, but we're not going to let the government buildings, government facilities, government functions operate as if they're neutral on this thing. So no atheist display, and I know we don't want nativity scenes, but I don't know what appropriate, maybe a Christian message, in the government would be okay, but not the atheist display. So that would be a application of the first table of the law civilly. Similarly, the Sabbath laws, simply regulating commerce is the government on the Lord's Day would be the government promoting the first table of the law without requiring a prohibition to go round people up who don't happen to be in church. So I only give that as clarification to say everybody jumps to the locking up or the death penalty for people who disobey the first table of the law in a Christian nationalist framework, and that's simply not their position. Now, for some of them it might be, but I'm saying there are softer and harder positions on this, and even those guys talk about prudence in how you do that.
I appreciate, George, you acknowledging there is a first table, or there is a natural law argument against blasphemy, and
okay, I was afraid to contradict you on
no,
your.
I appreciate that. I can concede that some might not see it, but I'm glad you brought that up, and that there's a spectrum. That Baird is. I think the language he uses, at least in person, is a very light touch. The magistrate's role in maintaining piety is very light, but it is there. David Hall recently came out with an article on his cheerfully cheering Folly's demise, or his delightful Substack on the Sabbath in Germany. That there was this bodega owner who was fined 2,500 euros because his bodega was open on the Lord's Day, and the German, and it's in Berlin, the most secular city in Europe, I think. And the argument that the German police use is it's a natural law argument that Sunday is historically and culturally a day of rest and quiet. You may not have your store open to sell these sorts of products on Sunday, which I'm all for that. And I think the example I've used even in this country is car dealerships. In many states, it's still illegal for them to sell cars on the Lord's Day, and there's not a great advocacy amongst the car lobby to have those laws repealed, because then it levels the playing field. That no one can sell cars on the Lord's Day, and all our employees get a day off. So there's a public good in promoting these first table laws.
Well, I think that's the question though. Is are these laws done for the public good, or are these done for the sake of the glory of God? And
The
they're
maintenance
not
of piety.
necessarily isolated, but there is a difference between saying we cannot have blasphemy in our society because it dishonors God and God will judge us for this if you're a covenanted community of some kind, versus we don't like the way the public good is going right now. And if we eliminated some of this blasphemous stuff, it might make the society better. But that's a very utilitarian argument. And it's not necessarily a theological or the most devout of arguments. Um, I'm not sure how much the proponents of Christian nationalism have actually come clean on that, whether they're really doing this for the glory of God or they're doing this for a better community. Um, I'm all for a better community, but that doesn't necessarily glorify God. The way
Well,
that the church is supposed to glorify God in having its worship polity and government ordered by Scripture, the way Israel was supposed to glorify God, etc. Those are different standards for the redeemed community, for the history of redemption community, than for these other ordinary nations and what's good for them.
Doc, I share your concern for the emphasis and often idolatrous expressions of what you're arguing against. So but I don't know their motives. I don't know, if something is for the glory of God or for society's good. I mean, but I do share the concern. But to talk about the movement, and our report, the PCA report acknowledges this spectrum of views without naming names. But like for Doug Wilson, for instance, he used to be the extremist. Now he's kind of in the middle of the conversation, and he's post-mill. And I think, now people are going to object to what I'm saying but I think his driving motivation is the glory of God. He's not expecting things in his generation, but he's thinking 500 years out. Whereas a Wolf, his whole Stephen Wolf is amillennial, and his whole definition is to procure natural goods for man now. And it's a natural law argument that the Lord, ordered and ordained society to operate a certain way. And by the way, it's okay to want that. You mentioned ministry to state. So 1 Timothy 2 says to pray for the emperor, for the leaders, for all, for your leaders, for your authorities. What's the reason it says? That it would go well with you, that you would live peaceful and quiet lives, godly and dignified in every way. So the first reason that's given is so that you live well. So there's peace where you live. And then it says, and the Lord God wants all peoples to be saved and come to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. So there's clearly an evangelistic desire in praying for magistrates, but it's not a base thing to want an ordered society. And I know you guys want that, whether you're clearly R2K, modern two kingdom, or you're just adjacent to it or whatever. One of the, Christian nationalists are often mischaracterized, and so are R2K. And I'll acknowledge that. You guys often get tarred with, well, you don't care about this world and you don't care about politics. Well, I actually think you guys are very political. You just try to leave, scripture out of it. You want to go by general revelation, but you do care about the world we live in. And I think the Lord does too. So
that's helpful. So Dr. Hart, if you could just summarize for us.
So formal, Ryan. It was Daryl earlier.
I
must
know,
have disappointed you, and now it's going.
No. It's I like to alternate, Professor Hart. But so people, one of the things that I think people may not realize is that you've been studying these things your whole life, whereas a lot of these guys who are having this conversation now, they've just realized that you know Hodge existed 5 years ago, and that Hodge had a political theology. That's new to them, and they're all excited about it. But this is you've been living with Machen since graduate school. So I think it's that's why I call you Dr. Hart here, because I know you've thought about these things, and you've developed um, something of a political theology, for lack of a better expression. But so you try to propose a middle way that's not civil religion and not Christian nationalism, and I think we've heard from that. But if you could, in two or three sentences, summarize how you believe that religion and the true religion should what its role should be in the public square, or what the goal should be in the public square for the true religion.
Well, I mean, building off in some ways what George was just saying about public good and Wolf versus Wilson. I mean, I do think maybe one of the differences, I'd have to think about this more, throw it out there, see if George wants to react and even follow up at all. But I do think the critics of Christian nationalism versus the proponents of it, the critics are more worried about the church and want to see the church do well, because that is the way to build a Christian community, which could eventually lead to a Christian nation, or a Christian society in some way. But but you ask what I hold up. But I mean, Machen, I'll go to Machen. Machen gave an address, 1933, 4 years into the Great Depression. When was the Great Depression the worst? Anyway, it was pretty bad. The American Academy of Political and Social Scientists had a conference, and they had a panel on the responsibility of the religious groups in the light of this controversy. And Machen was there with a Roman Catholic priest and a rabbi, and his task was to describe what the responsibility of the church in the new age is. And this is how he ended his address there. Responsibility of the church in the new age is the same as its responsibility in every age. It is to testify that this world is lost in sin, that the span of human life, nay, all the length of human history, is an infinitesimal island in the awful depths of eternity, that there is a mysterious, holy, living God, creator of all, upholder of all, infinitely beyond all, that he has revealed himself to us in his word and offered us communion with himself through Jesus Christ the Lord, that there is no other salvation for individuals or for nations save this, but that this salvation is full and free, and that whosoever possesses it has for himself and for all others to whom he may be the instrument of bringing it, a treasure compared with which all the kingdoms of the earth, nay, all the wonders of the starry heavens, are as the dust of the street. And so that glorious vision of the gospel and the church compared to the nations, which are as the dust of the street, is, I think, what animates me, and whatever polity will allow the church to proclaim its message. And I know this is going to sound like, oh, Hart's being a really pious boy, going for the gospel and going for the church, yada, yada. But whatever.
You're going to get an invitation to the Gospel Coalition here.
Fat chance. But whatever allows the church to do her work is what I will support, in effect. And I'm willing to be very pragmatic about the politics of whatever they may be, whatever stripe, that will create as much room and latitude for the church to do her work and for Christians to gather and worship her Lord. And and this goes back in some ways to George's point. I mean, the 2K guys, R2K, M2K, whatever you want to say, are political. Machen was really political. He was a strong spiritual of the church person, but also wrote tons of letters to newspapers and editors, testified before Congress about the Department of Education, which didn't happen until 1978, thanks to Machen's testimony. I'm kidding. But, he was a political guy, and his father was an attorney. His brother was an attorney. They were steeped in politics. So it's not as if this is just an otherworldly faith that just give me my Bible and my Bible study and my prayer time, and that's it. I'll be happy to go along then with whatever happens. I mean, you need, as George also said with 1 Timothy 2, it would be good to have magistrates creating conditions so that we could have peaceful and quiet lives in the fellowship of the saints. So you can't be sort of ignorant or naive about politics, although not every Christian is called to do that as well. I mean, there are some Christians that just aren't cut out for following politics even, or reading about it in the news. Anyway, my answer to that is basically what helps the church, what helps the gospel.
Can I speak to that, Rye? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's a great tie-in for the ministry that I do, and I do appreciate Dr. Hart to be more formal with him. Even raising that at the beginning, because one of our mantras is people, not politics. I change it and say people, not policy, because everything is a political statement right now. If you say in the beginning God created them male and female in his image, that's a theological statement, it's a historical statement, it's an ontological statement, but it's also a political statement today, because we're being told men could be women and women could be men. But I'm not there for policy. I'm there for the people. And the chaplaincy has a long history in Christianity and in our tradition in particular. John Knox had the king's ear. Obviously, we look all the way back to people the Lord used from the covenant community in Scripture, in pagan administrations. And so I agree, Dr. Hart, and with everything you said. I mean, the church is the hope of the world. It's where Christ's kingdom it's how Christ's kingdom is manifest in the world. And in God's providence, he also has civil government. And how much better if these people were evangelized, discipled, cared for, and that's what I'm doing there. And I do it to both sides of the aisle. As a matter of fact, in Florida, you've indicated there's different states and different places that have different toleration for various things. I mean, there's a lot of faith expression, particularly Christianity. A lot of it's weird. In Florida's government. And so it's they're not surprised with I'm walking around as a pastor in the halls of government, but where I have been able to make really good relationships is across the aisle, quite frankly, because, and this, this is not meant to be offensive or whatever, but like Florida is a heavily red state with super majorities in the House and the Senate. And in my observation, Democrat senators and representatives, every bill passes that the Republicans want to pass. All the attention is on the Republicans. And yet all the Republicans are used to having Christian pastors do what I call like drive-by prayers. So they're always coming through the government. They want to pray. They're praying for all their Republicans, and very little focus is on the Democrats. And I found just a great reception to me going in and talking with these people and building relationships with them and seeing what makes them tick. I mean, a lot of them are very passionate about education and kids, and being able to speak on that level with them, and for them to know that I'm a minister of the gospel. And then they see me. I mean, right now I have floor rights in the House of Representatives. So I'm in there when they're entering the chambers to do their calling under the Lord. I mean, the Lord raises these people up for this, and there is a symbolic thing going on there where a minister of the gospel, and they know that about me. I mean, I'm not well known yet, but I am becoming known, and they're going to make these votes for the good of the people. And so that's a lot of the work that I do. And yesterday I hosted my first Bible study. I was asked by somebody in the governor's office, not DeSantis, everybody wants to know, but for his staff and his employees to do a Bible study. And there were 7 people showed up, everybody from director level to assistants, and they're hoping it will grow. And so, it's just a blessing we're able to do this in the government. Some states wouldn't even allow you to do it. So,
Well, George
I hope you're
Sayour,
using Amos for your Bible study, George.
you hope what?
You're using Amos. Get a little social justice going there. Come on.
Oh, there you go. Yes. Well, that's biblical. So, yeah.
It is.
Well, George Sayour and Professor Dr. Daryl Hart, thank you so much for your time and your interactions today.
Thanks for.
Well,
Ryan.
good, Dr. Hart.
Good to be with you both.
Yeah, likewise, and thanks for letting me crash.
This was great.
Keep an eye on-
Next time we need to get T. David Gordon on as well. He was maybe my favorite professor at Grove City.
Oh yeah.
So
I was just on a Presbycast with Dr. Gordon on Wednesday.
Yes, yeah. I listened to that one.
And he was all dressed up too. He had his bow tie on.
Well,
James
do you
Barron.
need- James Barron. Do you need to go, or do you have did you want to go?
I have another recording in 6 minutes.
Look at you banging them out. But then I'm gonna get the last word. Like the PCA report was not approved, and it does not reject Christian nationalism. That's my final word on the topic.
All right, thanks.
Well, we'll have to talk about that one.
Yeah, we can reschedule that. And I would love to when the OP report comes out, I'd love to get you back on to talk about it.
Sure.
If George doesn't beat me to it, or maybe we'll have to bring George in since he's copyrighted these terms.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you
Good
both.
to see you, Daryl. Yeah.
All right. Good to see you guys.
Bye. Thanks for joining the conversation on the Westminster Standard, which is the podcast of Jude 3. For more information or to support our work at promoting confessional renewal within the Presbyterian Church in America, please visit our website, jude3pca.org. Join us again next time. I'll talk to you then.